Alexander White had spent his entire life building an empire, controlling every aspect of his world with precision. He was the kind of man who didn't believe in surprises, until the day two 10-year-old boys walked into a luxury hotel, looked him straight in the eye, and said 4 words that shattered everything he thought he knew. "You are our father." In that moment, the billionaire CEO's carefully constructed life unraveled, leaving him with a question he had never asked himself before. What if success wasn't the most important thing he had built? Alexander White was used to luxury. As the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, he had spent years perfecting his life, ensuring that everything ran exactly as he wanted. His time was valuable, his schedule precise, and his world free from surprises. That's why, when he walked into the lobby of the prestigious Grand Meridian Hotel in New York, his mind was already occupied with the details of his upcoming business meetings, not the possibility that his entire life was about to be turned upside down. The hotel's marble floors gleamed under the chandelier lights, and the low murmur of conversations from the wealthy guests blended seamlessly with the classical music playing in the background. Alex approached the reception desk, preparing to check into his penthouse suite, when he heard a hesitant yet determined voice behind him. "Mr. White." He barely registered the voice at first, assuming it was a hotel employee, but something about its tone made him turn around. Standing a few feet away were 2 boys, no older than 10, identical in every way, dark brown hair, piercing blue eyes, and expressions that mixed both nervousness and determination. Their clothes were neat but clearly not expensive, and one of them clutched a worn-out backpack as if it were the most important thing he owned. Alex frowned slightly, confused by their presence. "Yes," he replied, his voice even but guarded. The boys exchanged a look, as if silently deciding which of them should speak. Finally, the one holding the backpack stepped forward. "We need to talk to you," he said, his voice steadier than Alex expected for a child his age. Alex glanced around the lobby, noticing a few curious glances from nearby guests. He had no idea who these kids were or why they were addressing him so directly, but something about their expressions unsettled him. "I'm sorry, but do I know you?" The second boy, who had been silent until now, took a deep breath and met Alex's gaze head-on. "We're your sons." For the first time in years, Alexander White was speechless. The noise of the lobby faded into the background as his brain tried to process what he had just heard. Sons? That was impossible. He had no children. He had never been married, and he had certainly never been in a situation where he would have fathered 2 boys without knowing about it. A moment passed, and when he didn't respond, the first boy continued. "Our mom, she passed away a few weeks ago. Before she died, she told us who you were." Alex felt an unexpected chill run through him. There was something about the way they spoke, the confidence in their words, that made it difficult to dismiss them outright. His instincts told him this wasn't a scam, and yet the logical part of his mind refused to accept the possibility. "Who was your mother?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Lillian Brooks," the second boy answered immediately. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. He hadn't thought about Lillian in nearly a decade, but hearing it now, from these boys who claimed to be his children, sent memories flooding back. They had been together for a short time, one of those intense, fleeting relationships that burned bright and ended abruptly. She had been kind, full of life, but their worlds had been too different. She had left without a word, and he had never seen her again. The pieces started to fit together in ways he didn't like. The timeline. The boy's age. Their resemblance to him, which he could no longer ignore now that he was truly looking at them. A tightness settled in his chest. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, more to himself than to them. The boy with the backpack shrugged. "We don't know. But she told us you were our dad, and now she's gone. We had nowhere else to go." Alex ran a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. This was impossible, and yet, here they were, standing in front of him, forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about his past. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the fact that they might actually be telling the truth or the realization that if they were, he had missed 10 years of their lives without even knowing they existed. "Come with me," he finally said, his voice steady but firm. The boys exchanged another glance before nodding in unison. Alex led them toward the elevator, his mind spinning with 1,000 questions, none of which had answers yet. If they were telling the truth, if Lillian had kept this from him all these years, then his life was about to change in ways he could have never prepared for. And for the first time in his carefully controlled world, Alexander White had no idea what would happen next. The ride up to the penthouse was silent except for the occasional ding of the elevator as it passed each floor. Alex stood with his hands in his pockets, stealing glances at the boys beside him. Now that he had time to really look at them, the resemblance was undeniable. The sharp angles of their faces, the way their brows furrowed slightly when they were deep in thought, even the way they stood, straight-backed and quietly observing everything around them, reminded him of himself. It was unsettling. When the elevator doors opened, Alex led them into his penthouse, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. The boys hesitated at the entrance, their gazes sweeping over the pristine furniture, the perfectly arranged decor, the cold elegance of the space. It was clear that children had never lived here. There were no scattered toys, no signs of warmth or chaos, just a home built for a man who had spent years prioritizing work over everything else. "Come in," Alex said, motioning them inside. He walked toward the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge before turning back to face them. "You should start from the beginning. How did you find me?" The boy with the backpack, who Alex was starting to assume was the more outspoken of the two, unzipped it and pulled out a small envelope. He placed it on the counter and slid it toward Alex. "Mom left this for us." Alex hesitated before picking it up. His fingers tightened slightly around the paper as he unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was unmistakably Lillian's, neat, slightly slanted, with a certain fluidity that he had always found beautiful. "Alex. Asterisk, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and Jake and Oliver have come looking for you. I know you probably have a million questions, and I wish I could be the one to answer them. The truth is, I made a choice a long time ago not to tell you. You were building your future, and I didn't want to be the one to disrupt it. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that the boys would be better off not knowing a father who was too busy for them. But I see now that I was wrong. They deserve to know who you are, and you deserve to know them. They're good kids, Alex. Smart, kind, stronger than they should have to be. And now, they have no one but you, asterisk. I hope you do right by them. Lillian." Alex let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the letter before he carefully set it down. He wasn't sure what frustrated him more, the fact that Lillian had kept them from him for 10 years, or the fact that she had been right. If she had told him back then, would he have been ready? Would he have stepped up? Or would he have convinced himself that his career was more important than raising 2 children? His throat felt tight as he looked up at the boys, his sons. Jake and Oliver. The weight of it all settled heavily on his chest. "You've been on your own since she passed." His voice was quieter now, less controlled than he would have liked. Oliver, the quieter one, finally spoke. "We stayed with a neighbor for a while, but she couldn't keep us. Social workers were going to put us in foster care, so we ran away." His voice was steady, but there was something in his eyes, something wary, guarded. Alex ran a hand over his face. "You ran away. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" Jake lifted his chin slightly, defiant. It was better than being separated. That hit Alex harder than he expected. The idea of them being split up, tossed into a system where no one knew or cared about them, made something cold settle in his chest. He exhaled, trying to process everything. Finally, he nodded. "All right." Jake frowned slightly. "All right? "You're staying here," Alex said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The boys exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. "Just like that?" Oliver asked. Alex leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Just like that. You said you had nowhere else to go. Now you do." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Jake nodded, as if accepting that this was real. Oliver followed a second later. Alex took a deep breath. He had no idea what he was doing, no clue how to raise two 10-year-olds, but there was one thing he was certain of: he wasn't going to let them go. Not now. Not ever. Alex had always been a man who thrived on control. He built his life around order, logic, and careful planning. But now, for the first time in years, he felt completely out of his depth. It had been less than 24 hours since Jake and Oliver had walked into his life, and already, everything felt different. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual, not because of an alarm or a meeting, but because the quietness of the penthouse felt heavier than before. He was used to silence, he preferred it, in fact, but now that he knew two kids were sleeping down the hall, the stillness made him uneasy. He got up, pulled on a t-shirt, and stepped into the hallway, pausing outside the guest room where they had stayed the night before. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open gently and found the room mostly untouched, except for the two backpacks sitting near the bed. The bed itself was empty. His heart jumped slightly as he turned toward the living room, his mind instantly jumping to the worst-case scenario. What if they had left? What if they had decided they didn't want to stay here with a stranger who barely knew what he was doing? But as soon as he stepped into the open space of the penthouse, he spotted them. Both boys were sitting on the floor in front of the coffee table, quietly eating bowls of cereal. Jake was flipping through channels on the TV remote, while Oliver sat cross-legged, focusing intently on a book. They both turned to look at him as he walked in. "You're up early," Jake said before turning back to the TV. Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "So are you." Oliver shrugged. "We're used to waking up early." Alex ran a hand over the back of his neck. He wasn't sure what the protocol was here. Was he supposed to ask if they had slept well? If they needed anything? He wasn't even sure what kids usually ate for breakfast, but from the looks of it, they had already figured it out themselves. He walked into the kitchen, glancing at the cereal box sitting on the counter. "You guys just helped yourselves." Jake looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "We didn't think you'd cook." Alex smirked slightly. "Good call." He poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching them. It was strange, this feeling of not knowing what came next. He was used to walking into meetings with a plan, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But with Jake and Oliver, he was just taking it moment by moment, unsure of what the right move was. "So," he said finally, "I figured today we could go get some things for you. Clothes, school supplies, whatever else you need." Jake looked at him suspiciously. "You don't have people who do that for you?" Alex exhaled through his nose, amused. "I do. But I figured you'd want to pick your own stuff." Oliver set his book down and studied him. "Are we going to school?" Alex paused for a second. That was something he hadn't thought about yet. He knew they had probably missed a lot of school, considering everything they had been through, but the idea of enrolling them, making it official, suddenly made everything feel even more real. "Yes," he said after a moment. "But let's take it one step at a time." The boys exchanged another glance, as if silently deciding whether to argue. Finally, Jake just shrugged and went back to his cereal. Later that morning, Alex took them to a department store downtown. He wasn't used to shopping for anything other than expensive suits and watches, so walking through the aisles of kids' clothing felt like stepping into completely foreign territory. The boys, however, seemed to know exactly what they were doing. They picked out jeans, hoodies, sneakers, simple, practical things. They didn't gravitate toward anything flashy or expensive, and Alex noticed how often they checked the price tags before adding something to the cart. "You don't have to worry about the cost," he said as he watched them hesitate over a pair of sneakers. Jake glanced at him. "We're just not used to this." Alex frowned slightly. He knew they had lived modestly with their mother, but the fact that they were so cautious with money at their age made something in his chest tighten. He didn't want them to feel like they had to hold back. "You're not going to go crazy and buy 10 pairs of shoes," he said, "but you also don't have to act like I'm going to take it all away if you pick something nice." Jake hesitated, then finally nodded, grabbing the sneakers he wanted. After the shopping trip, they stopped at a small diner for lunch. The boys were quieter than before, but not in an uncomfortable way. It was as if they were still adjusting to this new reality, just as he was. As they ate, Alex found himself watching them closely, picking up on their small differences. Jake was the more outspoken one, always the first to respond, always with a sharp comment or question. Oliver was quieter, more observant, the type to think before he spoke. It was strange how quickly Alex could see pieces of himself in both of them. "You guys want to do anything else today?" he asked as he finished his coffee. Oliver looked thoughtful. "Can we go to a bookstore?" Alex blinked, surprised. "A bookstore?" Oliver nodded. "Mom used to take us all the time." Alex wasn't sure why, but that hit him in a way he didn't expect. He had spent years not knowing about their existence, and now, suddenly, there were these small details, pieces of their lives that he had never been a part of. He had missed their first words, their first steps, their birthdays. He hadn't been there when their mother read them bedtime stories, when she took them to bookstores, when she shaped them into who they were. But he was here now. And maybe that was what mattered. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "We can go to a bookstore." Jake smirked. "You don't seem like the type of guy who reads a lot." Alex chuckled. "I read. Just not for fun." Oliver smiled for the first time that day. "Maybe we'll find you something to change that." Alex wasn't sure what kind of father he was supposed to be. He didn't have the answers, didn't have a manual for how to do this right. But as he sat there with his sons, he realized he didn't need to have everything figured out right away. He just needed to show up. And for now, that was enough. Alex had always been a man of routine. Every part of his day was planned, from the moment he woke up to the second he went to sleep. His world revolved around schedules, efficiency, and control. But now, with 2 10-year-olds living under his roof, his carefully constructed life was beginning to shift in ways he never expected. The first major adjustment was the noise. His penthouse had always been silent, a place where he could think without distractions, where the only sounds were the hum of the city outside his floor-to-ceiling windows and the occasional beep of his phone. Now, there were footsteps running down the hall, the clatter of dishes as the boys made their own breakfasts, the muffled sounds of laughter and bickering as they talked in the other room. He hadn't realized just how quiet his life had been until they arrived. One morning, as he walked into the kitchen, he found Jake standing on one of the chairs, reaching for the top shelf where Alex kept the cereal. Oliver stood nearby, arms crossed, clearly unimpressed with his brother's method. "You're going to fall," Oliver said, watching him struggle. Jake ignored him, stretching further. "I've got it." Alex leaned against the counter and raised an eyebrow. "You could just ask for help." Jake turned his head sharply, startled, and nearly lost his balance. Alex grabbed his arm before he could topple over and set him back on the floor. Jake sighed, annoyed. "I had it." "Sure you did," Alex said, amused, before pulling the cereal box down and handing it to him. Oliver smirked. "Told you." As the boys ate at the counter, Alex poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from them. He watched them closely, trying to process the fact that just a few days ago, he didn't even know they existed. Now, They were part of his daily life. They fit into his space in a way that was both foreign and strangely natural. Jake broke the silence. "So, what exactly do you do all day?" Alex raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "You're always checking your phone, looking serious. Is your job just being a businessman?" Alex smirked. "Pretty much." Oliver glanced up. "Do you like it?" The question made Alex pause. No one had ever asked him that before. His whole life, his career had been about climbing higher, making more, winning. He never stopped to think about whether he actually liked it. "I'm good at it," he finally said. Jake leaned back in his chair. "That's not the same thing." Alex studied him, slightly impressed. "No, it's not." The conversation drifted after that, but the question stayed with Alex. Did he actually enjoy the life he had built, or had he just convinced himself that success meant happiness? He pushed the thought aside. He had more immediate things to figure out, like what he was supposed to do with the boys all day. "Since you're going to be staying here for a while, we need to set up some things," he said. "School, activities, maybe sports. Anything you guys are interested in?" Jake shrugged. "I used to play baseball." Oliver nodded. "I like art." Alex made a mental note. "All right. We'll look into schools first, then see about sports and art classes." Jake narrowed his eyes. "You really don't know how to do this, do you?" Alex huffed a quiet laugh. "Not even a little." Oliver tilted his head. "Then why are you trying?" That question hit deeper than Alex expected. He could have easily hired someone to handle all of this. Tutors, nannies, assistants, people who actually knew how to take care of kids. But he didn't want to hand them off to someone else. He had already lost 10 years with them. He wasn't about to lose any more. "Because you're my sons," he said simply. The boys exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. It was clear they weren't used to hearing that. Maybe they weren't sure if they believed him yet. After breakfast, they spent the day looking at schools. Alex had always assumed picking a school was just a matter of choosing the most prestigious one, but as he watched the boys explore the campuses, he realized it wasn't that simple. They weren't impressed by massive libraries or high-tech classrooms. They cared about things he hadn't considered, whether the teachers were nice, whether there was a baseball field, whether there was an art program Oliver could actually enjoy. By the end of the day, he let them decide. They picked a school that wasn't the most expensive or prestigious, but one that felt right to them. Alex had never let someone else make a decision that affected him before, but this time, he didn't mind. That night, as the boys got ready for bed, Alex walked past their rooms and heard them talking. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices were clear through the slightly open door. "Do you think he's serious?" Jake asked. "I don't know," Oliver admitted. "But he didn't have to let us stay." There was a pause, then Jake sighed. "I guess we'll see." Alex stood there for a moment before quietly walking away. He had spent his entire life proving himself in business, showing people that he was capable, reliable, powerful. But for the first time, he realized he had something else to prove. He had to prove to his sons that he wasn't going anywhere. The first few days with Jake and Oliver had been an adjustment, but Alex quickly realized that settling into this new reality would take more than just setting up their rooms and picking out a school. The boys were polite and respectful, but there was still a distance between them, an invisible wall built from years of never knowing each other. They had lived an entire life without him, and no matter how much he wanted to make things right, trust wasn't something that could be built overnight. That morning, as he walked into the kitchen, he found Oliver sitting at the counter, sketching in a notebook. His brow was furrowed in concentration, his pencil moving smoothly across the page. Jake, on the other hand, was standing in front of the open fridge, staring at its contents as if waiting for something to magically appear. "You're just going to stand there all morning, or are you actually going to pick something? Alex asked, leaning against the counter with his coffee. Jake turned his head slightly. I'm thinking. Alex smirked. You think a lot for someone who eats the same thing every day. Jake rolled his eyes and grabbed a yogurt, while Oliver continued sketching, seemingly lost in his own world. Alex glanced at the paper, catching a glimpse of a detailed drawing of the city skyline. You're pretty good, Alex said, nodding toward the sketchbook. Oliver looked up, his expression unreadable, then shrugged. Mom taught me. Alex felt that familiar pang of guilt every time the boys mentioned their mother. He hated knowing how much of their life he had missed. He didn't know what Lillian had been like as a mother, but he knew she must have been good. She had raised them to be independent, smart, and far more mature than most kids their age. She must have been proud of you, Alex said. Oliver hesitated for a second, then gave a small nod. She always said I could do anything if I worked hard enough. Alex took a sip of his coffee, watching him closely. She was right. Oliver looked surprised, as if he wasn't used to hearing that from anyone but his mom. Jake, who had been quietly eating, suddenly spoke up. What about you? What did your parents teach you? The question caught Alex off guard. His parents weren't exactly the kind to sit him down and offer life lessons. His father had been ruthless in business and expected the same from him, while his mother had always been more concerned with social appearances than parenting. He had spent most of his life proving himself to them, making sure he never failed, because failure wasn't an option in the White family. They taught me how to work hard, Alex said simply. Jake studied him. That's it? Alex set his coffee down. That's what mattered to them. Oliver tilted his head slightly. Is that what matters to you? Alex wasn't sure how to answer that. For most of his life, success had been everything, building his company, growing his wealth, making sure he never showed weakness. But sitting here now, watching these two kids who were his sons but still felt like strangers, he wasn't sure if the things he once valued really meant as much as he thought. I used to think so, he admitted. But things change. Jake didn't push further, but the way he looked at Alex made it clear that he was still trying to figure him out. Later that afternoon, Alex decided to take them to one of the sports complexes he had a membership at. It was a high-end facility, the kind meant for professional athletes and executives who wanted exclusive access to the best equipment. He hadn't been there in months, but it was the first thing that came to mind when he thought about what to do with two energetic 10-year-olds. When they arrived, Jake's eyes lit up at the sight of the baseball field. We can play here. Alex nodded. Yeah. You said you used to play, right? Jake grinned. Yeah, but never somewhere like this. Oliver, meanwhile, was more interested in the basketball court. He wasn't as outwardly excited as Jake, but Alex could see the curiosity in his eyes. You guys can do whatever you want, Alex said. Just don't break anything. Jake took off toward the batting cages while Oliver wandered toward the court, dribbling a ball experimentally. Alex sat on the bleachers, watching them, feeling strangely out of place. He was used to leading board meetings, negotiating contracts, making multi-million-dollar decisions. But sitting here, watching his kids be, well, kids, he realized how unfamiliar this world was to him. After a while, Jake jogged over, slightly out of breath. You play? Alex raised an eyebrow. Baseball? Not since I was your age. Jake tossed him a glove. Then let's see if you're any good. Alex sighed but stood up, rolling his shoulders. All right. But if I embarrass myself, we're never speaking of this again. Jake smirked. Deal. To his own surprise, Alex wasn't terrible. He wasn't great either, but he could still catch and throw well enough to keep up with Jake. Oliver eventually joined in, and for the first time since they had arrived, Alex saw them laughing, really laughing, not just polite smiles or small smirks. At some point, Alex caught Jake glancing at him with something that almost looked like approval. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By the time they left, the boys were exhausted but happy. As they got into the car, Jake turned to Alex. "Today wasn't bad." Alex smirked. "That's the nicest thing you've said to me so far." Jake shrugged. "You're still figuring things out. But you're trying." Oliver nodded in agreement. "Yeah. And that's more than we expected." Alex wasn't sure if that was supposed to make him feel better or worse. He knew he had a long way to go before they fully trusted him, but at least he was making progress. As they drove back to the penthouse, Alex found himself glancing at them through the rearview mirror. Maybe he wasn't the kind of father they needed yet, but for the first time in his life, he was willing to learn. The next few days were filled with small but meaningful adjustments. Alex had spent years living alone, accustomed to silence, order, and a lifestyle that revolved around work. Now, he was slowly adapting to having two 10-year-olds in his penthouse, which meant noise, unpredictability, and an ever-growing list of things he had never thought about before, like making sure there was food they actually wanted to eat, figuring out their school enrollment, and learning what it meant to be responsible for someone other than himself. One evening, after a long day at the office, he walked into the penthouse to find the boys in the living room. Oliver was sitting on the couch, sketching in his notebook as usual, while Jake was on the floor, watching a baseball game on the massive TV. There were empty snack wrappers on the coffee table, a stray sock near the couch, and a backpack half-zipped with school forms spilling out of it. It was a mess, but for some reason, Alex didn't feel the usual irritation he might have had before. Instead, he just sighed and set his briefcase down. Jake barely glanced at him. "You look tired." Alex smirked. "That obvious?" Oliver looked up from his sketchpad. "You work too much." "That's what happens when you run a company," Alex said, loosening his tie. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Ever thought about doing something else?" Alex chuckled, sinking into the armchair. "Like what?" Jake shrugged. "I don't know. Something fun." Alex tilted his head slightly. He had spent his entire adult life building his business, pushing himself harder with each passing year. Fun wasn't exactly something he had prioritized. Even when he traveled, it was for work. Even when he went to events, they were strategic networking opportunities. He hadn't done something just for the sake of enjoyment in longer than he could remember. "What do you guys consider fun?" he asked. Jake smirked. "Baseball, obviously." Oliver tapped his pencil against his sketchpad. "Reading, drawing, just having time to do stuff you actually like." Alex thought about that. His life had been built on constant movement, always thinking 10 steps ahead, never stopping long enough to enjoy the present. Maybe that was why this whole situation with the boys felt so unfamiliar. He had never really slowed down long enough to know what life outside of work was supposed to look like. A sudden thought struck him. "You two ever been to an amusement park?" Jake's eyes widened. "Like a real one? With roller coasters?" Alex nodded. Oliver shook his head. "Mom never had time to take us." Alex leaned forward. "Well, I have time now. How about we go this weekend?" Jake looked skeptical. "You? At an amusement park? Wearing what, a three-piece suit?" Alex smirked. "I do own normal clothes, you know." Oliver laughed. "I'll believe it when I see it." By the time the weekend arrived, Alex had arranged for them to visit one of the largest amusement parks just outside the city. He had expected it to be chaotic, crowded, and exhausting, which it was, but he hadn't expected to actually enjoy it. Jake ran ahead, excited about every ride, dragging Oliver along with him. They started with a roller coaster that had multiple loops, and to his own surprise, Alex found himself going along with them. The ride was fast, disorienting, and something he would have never chosen to do on his own, but when he got off and saw the way the boys were grinning at him, he realized he didn't regret it. Throughout the day, they tried different rides, played games at the carnival booths, and even stopped for lunch at one of the overpriced food stands. Jake won a stuffed bear at a basketball shooting game and immediately handed it to Oliver, who rolled his eyes but took it anyway. At one point, while they were waiting in line for another ride, Oliver looked up at Alex and said, "Mom would have liked this." Alex glanced at him. "Yeah." Oliver nodded. "She always wanted us to have fun, even when things were hard." Alex swallowed the lump in his throat. He had spent so much time thinking about what he had missed, what he hadn't been there for, but maybe what mattered more was what he was doing now. That evening, after they returned home, the boys crashed almost immediately, exhausted from the long day. Alex stood in the hallway, looking at their closed doors, realizing how different his life had become in such a short time. He had walked into that hotel weeks ago thinking he was just a businessman, someone who controlled every aspect of his life with precision. Now, he was the father of two boys who had already changed him more than he had expected. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about work. He was thinking about them. Adjusting to life with Jake and Oliver was a slow process, but every day, Alex found himself learning more about what it meant to be a father. It wasn't just about making sure they had food, clothes, or a roof over their heads. It was about the little things, the way Oliver absent-mindedly tapped his pencil against the table when he was thinking, how Jake always tested the limits of every rule just to see if Alex would actually enforce it, the way they both hesitated before asking for things as if they were still unsure if they had the right to. One evening, Alex returned home earlier than usual, something he never would have done before the boys came into his life. He walked into the penthouse to find Oliver sitting on the couch, reading a book, while Jake was lying on the floor tossing a baseball up and catching it. There was a faint smell of burnt toast lingering in the air, and when Alex glanced toward the kitchen, he saw a plate of half-eaten sandwiches on the counter. "You guys attempted to cook?" Alex asked, raising an eyebrow. Oliver didn't look up from his book. "We made grilled cheese." Jake grinned. "Mostly." Alex smirked, walking over to inspect the mess they had left behind. "I assume mostly means the first few were disasters." Jake sat up. "More like Oliver forgot you have to butter the bread first." Oliver shot him a look. "I didn't forget. I just didn't know." Alex shook his head, amused. "Remind me to show you how to use the stove properly before you burn the place down." Jake stretched his arms behind his head. "You actually cook?" Alex leaned against the counter. "I know how. I just never have the time." Oliver glanced at him. "You have time now." The words caught Alex off guard. He had spent his entire life filling every second of his schedule with work, convinced that time was his most valuable asset. But now, for the first time, he was being forced to slow down, and he wasn't sure if he hated it or if he was starting to understand why it mattered. "I guess I do," he said after a moment. "Maybe I'll teach you both something that doesn't involve burning bread." Jake smirked. "That sounds like a challenge." The next day, Alex did something he had never done before. He canceled a meeting so he could be home in time to cook dinner with the boys. He didn't tell them in advance, partly because he wasn't sure if he was actually going to follow through with it. But when he walked through the door carrying a bag of groceries instead of his usual briefcase, their surprise was clear. "You actually meant it?" Jake asked, watching as Alex set the bag on the counter. Alex rolled up his sleeves. "What, you thought I was bluffing?" Oliver stood up from the couch, looking mildly impressed. "I mean, yeah." Alex smirked. "Well, you're about to learn that I don't bluff." He wasn't an expert chef, but he knew enough to get by. He taught them how to make pasta from scratch, showing them how to knead the dough, roll it out, and cut it into strips. At first, Jake was more interested in seeing how much flour he could get on the counter, while Oliver focused intently on getting the shapes just right. Alex found himself surprisingly patient, explaining each step, answering their questions, and watching as they slowly got the hang of it. By the time they were sitting at the table eating the finished product, Jake leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Okay, I'll admit. That was actually kind of fun." Oliver nodded. "It tastes better than the stuff from a box." Alex smirked. "Because you made it yourselves." Jake studied him for a moment, then set his fork down. "You know, you're not as bad at this as I thought you'd be." Alex raised an eyebrow. "At cooking?" Jake shrugged. "At all of it." There was something in his tone, something hesitant, like he wasn't sure he wanted to say it out loud. Alex had learned quickly that Jake was the type to test people before he trusted them. He wanted to see if Alex would stick around, if he was serious about this, or if it was just temporary. "I told you," Alex said, holding his gaze. "I'm not going anywhere." Jake didn't say anything, but after a moment, he nodded. That was enough. After dinner, Oliver stayed at the table, sketching in his notebook while Jake flipped through channels on the TV. Alex stood by the window, looking out at the city, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. A few weeks ago, his life had been predictable, controlled. Now, it was filled with unpredictability, messiness, and moments like this, small but meaningful. He wasn't sure if he was doing everything right. He probably wasn't. But for the first time, he wasn't just thinking about himself. He was thinking about them. And that had to mean something. The following weeks passed in a way that felt both new and strangely natural. At first, Alex had expected the transition to be more difficult, that the boys would resist his presence in their lives, or that he would struggle to find common ground with them. But slowly, without him even realizing it, they had settled into a rhythm. Mornings were no longer just about rushing out the door to get to the office. Now, they included making sure Jake and Oliver had everything they needed for school, checking if Oliver had packed his sketchbook, or reminding Jake not to forget his baseball glove. Evenings weren't filled with silence and late-night work emails anymore. Now, they were spent watching movies the boys picked out, debating over which pizza toppings to order, or playing video games that Alex was admittedly terrible at but enjoyed simply because it made the boys laugh. One Saturday morning, Alex was in the kitchen making coffee when he overheard the boys talking in the living room. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something about their conversation made him pause. "So, do you think we're staying here for good?" Jake asked, his voice quieter than usual. Oliver hesitated before answering. "I don't know. I think so. He hasn't said anything about us leaving." Jake sighed. "Yeah, but what if he changes his mind? What if he decides he doesn't want us around anymore?" Alex felt something tighten in his chest at those words. He had assumed that by now, they understood that he wasn't going anywhere, but hearing the doubt in Jake's voice made him realize that maybe they were still waiting for the moment when everything would fall apart again. They had spent their whole lives knowing what it was like to lose people, to not have stability. It made sense that they would struggle to believe that this time was different. He stepped into the living room, and both boys immediately went quiet, looking up at him like they had been caught doing something wrong. He sat down across from them, setting his coffee mug on the table, and met their eyes. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. Jake shifted slightly, looking down. "You say that now, but what if?" "There's no what if," Alex interrupted. "I didn't know about you before. That wasn't my choice. But now that I do, I'm not just going to pretend you don't exist. You're my sons. That doesn't change just because things aren't always easy." Oliver studied him carefully, as if trying to determine if he really meant it. "Even if we mess up sometimes?" Alex smirked. "Especially if you mess up sometimes." Jake huffed a small laugh, but there was something lighter in his expression, like maybe he was starting to believe it. That afternoon, they went to Central Park. It wasn't a big, extravagant outing, just a simple afternoon outside, but it felt like something important. Jake brought his baseball, tossing it between his hands as they walked, while Oliver had his sketchbook tucked under his arm. They wandered through the paths, stopping to watch a group of street performers for a while, then eventually found an open grassy area where Jake convinced Alex to throw the ball around with him. Oliver sat nearby, sketching, occasionally glancing up at them before going back to his drawing. After a while, Jake threw the ball back to Alex and grinned. "You're getting better." Alex caught it easily. "I was never bad." Jake smirked. "That's debatable." They played for a little while longer before Oliver finally looked up from his drawing. "I think I'm done." Jake jogged over and peered over his shoulder. "Let me see." Oliver hesitated, then turned the sketchbook around so they could both see it. It was a drawing of the three of them, Alex standing in the middle, with Jake holding a baseball glove and Oliver holding his sketchpad. The detail was impressive, but it was more than that. It was the way Oliver had captured the way they stood, the way they looked like they belonged together. Alex felt something in his chest tighten again, but this time, it wasn't guilt or regret. It was something else, something he wasn't sure he had a name for yet. "This is good," Alex said, studying the sketch. Oliver shrugged, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "Thanks." Jake grinned. "I look cool." "You always think you look cool," Oliver muttered, rolling his eyes. They walked back toward the car as the sun started to set, the city lights beginning to flicker on in the distance. When they reached the penthouse, the boys went to their rooms, and for a moment, Alex just stood in the hallway, listening to the quiet sounds of them moving around. This place didn't feel empty anymore. It didn't feel like just a space he lived in, it felt like a home. That night, as Alex sat in his office, he glanced at his phone. His calendar was still packed, his schedule still demanding, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about work. He was thinking about what they were going to do tomorrow, what they needed for school next week, whether he should sign Jake up for a baseball league or get Oliver more art supplies. He was thinking about them. And for the first time in his life, that was what mattered most. This story is not just about unexpected fatherhood, it is about the deep transformation of a man who spent his entire life believing that success was measured only by money and power. Alexander White, accustomed to control and calculation, faced the most challenging test of all, becoming something he had never planned to be, a father. What makes this story special is not just the revelation itself but the journey the main character takes. He doesn't immediately understand that children are not just a responsibility but a true wealth that cannot be bought or planned. He has to step beyond the boundaries of his carefully structured world, learn to trust, to care, and most importantly, to put someone else before himself. The ending of this story is particularly important. It is not idealized, Alexander does not instantly become the perfect father, but he does the most important thing, he chooses to stay, he chooses not to run from this new reality but to accept it, to learn, and to change. And that is the key message, family is not something that comes ready-made, but something that is built step by step through mistakes, patience, and the willingness to be better. This story shows that true wealth is not found in money but in the people who are waiting for you to be there. And when Alexander finally realizes that his life has changed forever, he understands that he has made the most important investment of all, in family.